Okay, guys, welcome to today's show. We are going to be covering self-managed rental risks and really why solo landlords, they do need a lot of expert help, especially in today's climate with the private rented sector and all the legislation. And there's been so many changes, Karen. I'm sure you could back me up on that one.
It has, yeah. I mean, that's been, 10 years I've been doing this now, and there's been a lot of changes in that time. So, and as we can see, it's a full-time job.
Yeah, that you made a good point there. Like, I mean, I've seen so much things change since I've done this and within the industry. And then even when you come in from like your experience, you've seen so much things change, and it will continue to be like that. Us, obviously, as letting agents and managing agents, things have to keep up to date with all these changes to make sure that we're doing things correctly and by the book and everything's above board. And obviously providing that kind of level of service to clients because they entrust a letting agent to do that for them. But a lot of people do choose to self-manage. And with all these changes, you will really need to be abreast of what is the compliance measures and the legislation around what you are doing in terms of lettings. So as we enter further into 2026, owning and managing a rental home, it's increasingly demanding, and sometimes it can be unforgiving, and it does leave you a bit legally exposed if you're not educated enough, I think is the right way to look at that. With self-managed, rental risks are a lot greater than they ever were before, and we covered some of the reasons for that just there and as we come into the intro. But the margin for error and or neglect has it kind of has disappeared, and there's no increase, and now increasingly there's nowhere to hide. So this has caused landlords sometimes to sell up. We've seen a lot of that by the changes in legislation and tax and just the added responsibility. And on the flip side, others are starting to expand and even starting up portfolios or building on the portfolio that they've already had. However, success today means a lot of things, and it's monitoring, the legislative changes, maintaining really watertight records, and operating as if you are already being, audited in terms of waiting until that time comes and then think, oh, I better get everything done. So you can really defend your actions under any situation of scrutiny, basically, which would be an audit. But you need to really be in that position at any time, not just when that comes around. So I think with all that said, and understandably, many solo landlords are weighing up whether the small savings on management fees are worth the significant possible legal challenges that they face and financial exposure that comes with doing things self-managed and alone. So with that in mind, we are going to go through a guide today, Karen, that is really focused on self-managed rental risks and give you an idea of the lettings world. And I mean, what kind of things will that include us covering today, Karen?
Yeah, so there's various factors that we need to cover. Now, this doesn't matter whether you have one property, you could have one, you could have 10. The same rules apply to them all. So whether you're a first-time landlord just starting out or even an older landlord with a big portfolio, there's a lot of things that keep changing. You have to keep up to date. So some of the things that we're going to cover today are the ever-tightening legal landscape.
Yep.
So obviously, as you say, we've got to keep ourselves compliant. Major consequences for minor slip-ups. So obviously, there are a lot of penalties that can come with letting out a property if you're not doing things right. The effect of the landlord database, and no win, no fee housing solicitors. So there also, and our final one that we're going to cap up with is how managing agents reduce your risk, which is obviously what we're here for.
Yep.
While the rules are changing, your peace of mind can stay intact. So we'll obviously explore how these different professional managements can be a priceless asset to have by your side, basically. Obviously, as I say, we make this a full-time job because there's a lot involved in it. So do you really want that hassle yourself?
Yeah, I mean, self-managed is fine if that's what you want to do. Some people have as they make a career out of it and run a business, and that's totally fine. I just think that some people go into that without the knowledge of what they're taking on, and then sometimes are caught out legally, financially. You are really exposed. if you don't have the right knowledge and things behind you to actually tackle it correctly. So firstly, you did say we're going to talk about the ever tightening legal landscape, and that is the big one that keeps, you know, there's so much more compliance and legislation and things that we need to adhere to. So lead us in with that, Karen, the ever tightening legal landscape.
Yeah, so the legal framework for tenancies has fundamentally changed. So Scotland is ahead of the curve. Similar, and now obviously England is looking to bring in a system that is very similar to what we already have in place, and they're passing the Renters' Right Act in England. So this is going to shift that across the whole of the UK, so we're a bit more on a par, whereas just now it's England and Scotland are very different with their legislation when it comes to rental properties. This new bill is going to effectively bring us up to date. We've had a lot of these changes come into place since we changed from short assured to private residential tenancies back in 2017. So we are very much ahead of the curve here. We almost have about 9 years on England when it comes to it. So they're obviously bringing themselves up to the same kind of legislation that we are at just now. So in England on the 1st of May 2026, all existing and new tenancies will move to a periodic rolling system similar to what we have in Scotland just now. Obviously, we do not have any fixed terms. So this is abolishing the fixed term system and a Section 21 with no fault evictions. Yeah. So again, bringing it up to standards with basically what we have in Scotland just now. Yeah. So north of the border, the Housing Scotland Act 2025 has introduced permanent rent control areas where increases are strictly capped. So this is usually at a CPI of plus 1%. Now in Scotland, they have been discussing the rent caps areas. We don't in Fife have any in place just now, but obviously that is something that could be reviewed further down the line. So if you're a self-managing landlord, you will have to be aware of that for when your property if you're looking to do a rent increase, or if your property becomes vacant and you're putting it back on the market, you will have to consider that as well when you are re-advertising it with the new rent.
Yeah, so let's just quickly talk about rent control areas and the rent cap and things as well. So you said about CPI plus 1, it's obviously the price index, which is inflation plus the 1%. If they put a rent control in a certain area, don't have any at the moment, as you're saying, Karen, that can be enforced by each individual local authority for each area. So it could be different throughout different levels that could be set. Now, the way I believe it will work is if rents are being pushed up and really high, and tenants are then hitting back on that and going to Rent Service Scotland to say, look, I feel my rent's not in line with the market, it's very high. They will review that and they will decide whether it is too high and decide whether it should be increased or it should only be increased by a certain amount. And if that continues to happen in a certain area, they'll then think, right, okay, this area, the rent's becoming too high, and landlords or agents or whatever are pushing this too high, we're going to cap it at a certain level. And that's what should happen. But as you say, we need to see that in practice yet.
And as a landlord, this is something to keep in mind when you are considering doing rent increases, even just now. Obviously, making sure you're doing marginal increases that are bringing your rent and keeping it in line with market. But if you're trying to put it up too high, your tenant does have the right to go to a rent assessment officer. And that means that they will then set the rent, whether they think it's reasonable for you to actually have a rent increase implemented, and if so, by how much. So if you are landlords at self-managing, take that into consideration. Don't try and put it up too high that you're going to potentially end up losing out effectively if your tenant does go down that route with it. So we review our rents regularly, basically, and whenever I'm discussing rent increases with landlords, I'm trying to keep it reasonable so it's still affordable for the tenant. At the end of the day, we don't want to be ripping tenants off. We don't want to make it too unaffordable for them that they're then having to move out. Landlords then got a new vacant period, market insets going on again. So in effect, if you do a reasonable increase, you could keep your tenant long term, as opposed to potentially pushing them out and then having a whole new set of costs involved in reletting the property.
Yeah, I done a quick vlog the other day, just quickly to point that out. Like, have a grasp on what, especially if you're self-managing, like have a grasp on what the local properties that are similar to you in that area are letting for. But I would always speak to an agent who has a good local knowledge, because sometimes what you see online isn't a true reflection of the actual market. We've got certain platforms and things where people could advertise without the influence of an agent that's got experience in valuing property, and it could get a wee bit out of hand. So yeah, a mixture of having a good agent, having that knowledge yourself, and just finding that market rent where there's something that's not too high but not too low. Rental prices at the moment is a big topic in our daily conversations, Karen. Just trying to, manage people's expectations, both the landlord and the tenant, but also being fair and having a realistic outlook on a rental value that's sustainable for a tenant for a medium to long-term tenancy. How are they going to be able to fund that and want to stay there? And which ultimately, if you've got a tenancy that keeps being short-term because your rent's too high, you've got all that turnover and all that cost. It doesn't become cost-effective, even though you've got a higher rent because you're doing a lot of turnover. So there's a lot of things.
Finding the balance.
Yes, in the short, yeah.
So obviously we've discussed rent quite a bit there as well, but landlords across the UK are now facing a housing quality standard in the new AWABS law. So that's spelled AWAABS, if you want to look it up.
Yeah.
So this is an extension which mandates a strict timeline for a hazardous investigation. So if the tenant's reporting hazardous issues in the property, you are going to have a timescale to have these addressed or at least investigated.
Yeah, that's things like water ingress and damp issues and things like that.
So whether you own a rental home, the question is whether understanding and complying with lettings legislation all by yourself is the best strategy for staying on the right side of the law.
And that's what it really comes down to. I mean, I do believe that, as letting agents, we have to be educated and qualified to a certain degree to operate in lettings and provide that service, which is fine. But I think if landlords are then going to be operating in their own capacity, I think there should be some level of education or some level of qualification required. Maybe not as much as what a letting agent should be. I mean, there is a lot that goes into it, but just at least some basic qualification level to be able to operate lettings, because at the end of the day, you're providing a service, you're providing a home where people live, and it needs to be safe and fit for purpose and compliant and things as well. So yeah.
And that ties in perfectly to our next topic, which is major consequences for minor slip-ups.
Yes, and this can happen very quickly from something very minor, and it could escalate into something quite big. A few years ago, a slight mistake in paperwork by a landlord, it might have been forgiven. You might have been able to get away with it and change it, but they are now identified as legal breaches. And I think if anybody's been involved with anything with the first tier tribunal, they are very precise and meticulous about the paperwork and how things are presented. Even a spelling mistake can be very detrimental to proceedings or whatever. So it could really have a serious impact on your business ultimately. So again, to separate the country, I mean, in England, failing to serve the mandatory information sheet to existing tenants by the 31st of May 2026 can prevent you from regaining possession of your property. So, if that simple bit of paper, if you've not issued that, you're going to be back at square one. In Scotland, the maximum damages for unlawful eviction or wrongful termination have been increased to 36 times the monthly rent. Just like that sink in. If you do not carry things out properly, and you ultimately try and proceed with an unlawful eviction, you can be fined a hefty amount. Now, just like that sinking again, 36 times your monthly rent.
I'm just going to run that. So the average rent in Fife, for example, is 650 along those lines. We'll just go with that, for example. That times 36 is £23,400.
Yeah. I think the average rent is a bit higher than that, actually. But
yeah, anyway, I think it has a wee bit, but just for argument's sake.
I think that gives you a good idea. I mean, that's 20 odd grand in a penalty. And so, yeah, be very careful about if you're ever trying to do an eviction that is not done unlawfully. These kind of administrative oversights and serving notice can lead to, like I say, the start of that eviction process all over again, as well as fines and adding months of lost rent, and again, possibly mounting legal fees or, a combination of all these things just for an internal error. that's not been done properly. If it involves the tribunal and things at this stage, our best advice is to have legal professionals take care of it. As agents, you can't have your agent do that if you're using an agent. They are not legal professionals, and this is very much a legal process. So bear that in mind. And even if you're trying to do it yourself, which you can, and you're allowed to do that, you're allowed to represent yourself with things. It's a bit of a minefield, and the best advice would be get the right assistance in doing that. And really, I mean, today's reality is that the lack of knowledge is no longer accepted as a valid defence. Do you know, in years gone by, you could probably get away with saying, well, we didn't know that, we weren't aware, and it might, you know, but it's very clean cut now. I think it's only too right that the sector becomes a lot more professionalised, but you need to be obviously at that professional level to be able to deal with that. Intent doesn't matter, only purpose does. So you could say, oh, well, I meant to do that. Well, that's not good enough. You need to actually do it, which makes flawless accuracy the only real safety net and when it comes to a legal process. So yeah, as I say, you may have the best intentions, but it really doesn't matter if you've not followed through on procedure, done things correctly, and as I said, had that kind of flawless accuracy with things, and it really is flawless accuracy, then nothing else really stands in par with the legal system. So it is very much something to be conscious about. Yeah, and I'm sure you can back me up on that, Karen, because there's a few things where recently, I think, in terms when it comes to the detail, you've had an experience, and so have I, and we've discussed it, how very meticulously it's viewed, your information that you have.
You have to make sure everything is correct, and just there's so much detail that goes into a lot of the process that you do as well. And if you have one thing that's maybe off or not quite as it should be, you could lose a whole case over it, especially if you're going to tribunal and you're trying to gain an order of possession. If you've got that one thing that's wrong, you've wasted all your time basically, and you have to go back to the start. And then you may end up needing to seek a legal professional to help you with it. Whereas if you just maybe done that in the first place, then you would have saved yourself a lot of time and potentially money as well.
Yeah, and then that brings us to the effect of a landlord's database. So run us through that then, Karen.
Yes, so Scotland has required mandatory registration for years, and England launches its own private rented sector database later this year. So this put us an end to the off-the-radar landlords. So in Fife, we are all registered with landlord registration. We have our own Fife code, which has every landlord gets issued a landlord registration number, and the middle section of that for Fife is 250. So every registration is individual to a landlord. You can go onto landlord registration and search up a property and get a point of contact for the landlord or agent for that property, depending if the property is managed or not. So the landlord database does create a central digitalised record that links landlords to their properties, and it makes their compliance status visible to the council, mortgage lenders and tenants as well. So if you do not have a property that is on the landlord registration, Can
I give you, I'm just going to give you an interesting insight into where landlord registration come from and why it come about. And it was actually through antisocial. It was what's classed as antisocial. But there were so many reports coming in over the years and things about it went through antisocial, but it was actually like rubbish and things in people's gardens, and it was private rented properties, and nobody knew who owned them. To then be able to follow up and say, well, could you have this? Could you, give your tenant a nudge, or can you clear this? Or because there was no register to say this is the owner of this property. And so through antisocial is where the Antisocial Behaviour Act is where landlord registration come from and is attached to, which isn't the best. It's a shame that that's the way it comes through, but that is where it come from originally, and then the landlord registration come about. And all landlords in Scotland need to be registered.
Yeah.
A bit trivia for you.
Learn something new all the time. So by linking to the court system, the landlord database can see repossession claims automatically rejected for the rental homes that aren't currently listed as well. So as I say, you can see when the property is not on that registration system. For our process as well for being registered with landlord registration, your property has to be compliant to do so. So they will ask you if you have your property safety certificates, which obviously you should have, or at least be in the process of organising, because you cannot let your property without it being safety compliant.
Yeah, you cannot put a tenant in without all the compliance measures and certificates in place.
And in Scotland, failing to register a rental home is a criminal offence with fines up to £50,000. So again, another big number there that you do not want to be hit with. Well, England won't be far behind with fines up to £40,000 for repeat or serious breaches. Yeah.
So that's a pretty hefty fine, and if you're just to do a landlord registration, I think in Scotland now it's around about £100 to register your property in landlord registration, and that's valid for 3 years and has to be renewed at 3-year intervals. So for the sake of 100, or I think it's £110 the way it rounds off, it is a little price to pay to be added onto that register and do things properly.
Yeah, so in short, an online ledger for every rental property makes up gaps for your safety certificates or registration status immediately visible, with significant penalties if you breach the rules.
Yeah. So yeah, definitely landlord registration. It's a good thing. As I say, it's a shame the way it come around, but it's here to stay. Obviously, England are now following suit. And you do need to do that. If you're self-managing, you still need to do that. Any reputable agent will not market your property without a landlord registration number. The two main things to put, we cannot do a lettings listing without the energy performance certificate rating and the landlord registration. And we also will not move a tenant in without all the compliance certificates in place. So,
yes, compliance is key.
Yeah. So the other title we're going to talk about was No Win, No Fee Housing Solicitors. Now this will refer a lot to England. So for our south of the border viewers, this will be quite relevant to you, and you'll be quite familiar with this. But some solo landlords are becoming, targets of, these specialist no win, no fee housing solicitors who often focus on claims for things like damp and mold issues. Now, we have a different system up here, so you won't have solicitors doing that kind of work and chasing landlords that would have to go through the tribunal service and things. But again, they are, even south of the border, they are not strictly regulated under the AWAB's law that you mentioned earlier, Karen, which is obviously the pursuit of issues like damp and water ingress and things as well. So this is something of a silent threat that isn't really a headline yet, but more of these companies will undoubtedly spring up and take advantage of a business opportunity when AWAB's law and things is enforced. So new regulations require landlords to investigate significant hazards within 10 working days and begin repair within 5 working days of that investigation. So if a tenant reported, say, water ingress, or there's a real issue with mold and whatever. So you have these kind of time scales, like 10 working days to begin the repairs and 5 working days of that, 10 working days to start that and 5 working days within that to start the work. Now, the burden of proof is now firmly on you as the landlord to show that you have taken these reasonable steps to deal with the issues. And even if your tenant has not allowed access. Now you might find that a difficult one, because if a tenant is complaining that nothing's getting done, yet they don't give access, and you think, well, that's nonsensical. Why are they complaining but not giving access? It happens a lot.
They don't report it to us. That's another one. Tenants like to complain that nothing gets done when they've actually not reported it in the first place.
Yeah, so it does happen a lot more than you would actually expect, and it's not. You can't come back and say, well, the tenant didn't let me in. If it's at that point, then you follow the correct procedure to notify the tenant that access is being gained to the property with the correct notice to the tenant that access is being for that reason, whatever that may be. Yeah, so there is ways and means to follow and gain access. So if it come to the crunch and that was your response, like, well, the tenants have given me access, it's not an excuse, unfortunately. So housing solicitors do look for procedural gaps in what people are doing, such as a lack of time-stamped maintenance logs. They will argue that a landlord has been negligent and not upheld their duty of care. So yeah, again, you're going to have to look at your records of what correspondence has been between both parties and make sure you've got a good log of that, and what your actions you've proposed to take and when they're going to take place, and that whole timeline, because that's going to be, and have that recorded somewhere, and have communication to the tenant clearly so that they have been notified. And it's good, like, we've got a system where notifications and things are time-stamped, and when they open, that notification is time-stamped, and we have a clear cut, this is the timeline, and there's no argument with that. So that eliminates the possibility of saying, well, there's been negligence here and there's not been, the duty of care has not been upheld. So your records are so important. And without a really professional audit trail, it's difficult to mount a defence against an opportunistic, possibly, claim or pursuit. And self-managed landlords are often seen as the easy targets because they don't have the systems and the processes and the records that, like what we do have as letting agents. So if you're self-managed and you're worried about possibly not having the right system to keep track of things like that, it might be possibly time to speak to somebody that could maybe professionalise your workings, especially with the new legislation and laws coming into force. But yeah, as I say, these kinds of solicitors and things, England will be all too familiar, and as the AWAB's law and things comes into force, they will look for that opportunity. So please make sure that you've got all your T's crossed and your I's dotted, and you should be fine. If not, and you are worried, speak to a local professional agent and they should be able to assist you.
Yeah, that's the thing. The agents are here to help, and we can reduce a landlord's risk as well.
Yeah.
So obviously the role of a managing agent is shifted a lot more from simply doing the legal work to providing a robust protection for landlords as the law evolves and it tightens as well. Obviously, we've brought a lot more legislation in over the years, and they'll probably continue to do so. So some of the ways in which a managing agent can reduce your risks. So the best managing agents are providing an airtight audit trail, ensuring every document, safety check, and communication with the tenant is logged and admissible in a court or tribunal. So just as you say there, Richard, making sure everything is noted down.
Yeah.
And we have systems in place to account for that. Even a tenant can say, oh, I didn't get that email. And it's like, no, I can see how many times you've actually opened it.
Yeah.
Again, rigorous referencing filters out the best tenants, and regular mid-tenancy inspections catch maintenance issues early before they turn into breaches of housing standards. Now, this can come down to a tenant being negligible in the property, or it can even just come to general wear and tear, making sure that the property is keeping compliant, making sure the smoke alarms are still up as well. You can go into a property and the smoke alarm could have been beeping, the tenant's taken it down to change the battery and never got around to it, and it's still sitting down there. So making sure that you're doing inspections to keep the property compliant and looked after. A lot of self-managed landlords might skip on the inspections because they might find it a bit uncomfortable to do. Again, that's when having an agent there can be good, because it's having that third party to go into the property. It's impartial, it's making sure your property is being looked after, but it's also building that rapport with a tenant as well. Sometimes they can just think you're another person on the end of the phone, that you're there to deal with their complaints. But when you're out and you're getting that relationship with them, it can make things a lot easier to manage if there are issues in the property, because you do have that personal rapport with them. So as I say, self-managed landlords can find the inspection side of it a bit awkward, but that's what we're here for.
Yeah, definitely.
So we also act as an early warning system, preparing your rental property or portfolio ahead of any upcoming legislation changes to ensure every deadline is met.
Yeah, because things just change so much.
Yeah. And even keeping on top of your property safety certificate dates, if you've got gas safety is obviously every year, It's probably one of the easier ones to keep on top of because you know it is every year, but your EICR for your electrical installation condition report is every 5 years. So it can be an easy one to slip your mind because it is so far apart. But if you've got an agent in place, they'll be keeping an eye on the dates and notifying you when they're coming up for renewal so you can get prepared ahead of time for them.
Mm-hmm.
But in short, professional management takes landlords' legal compliance duties off your kitchen table and in the hands of an expert whose entire day is spent on protecting your interests.
Yeah, I think about, Jonah, we do it every day as part of it's our job. And you think, well, people that it's not their job and they do have another 9 to 5 job but have properties and try and self-manage. I mean, it depends. If they've maybe just got 1 or 2, it might not be a lot for them. But I've seen people try to do it with, 5, 6 and more, and try and do their job and trying. I just think, how do you do that without really pushing yourself to the edge and kind of burning yourself out? And it's not worth it. It's definitely not, especially since things change so much. And I think to round off, sorry, what were you going to say, Kim?
Even the side of it as well, like the maintenance aspect, like, I mean, you were taking a call at 11:30 last night. Like, as a landlord, do you really want to be doing that?
I did. They were very nice about it. I'm very surprised that I was speaking to them at 11:30 at night, but that's what we do, obviously. But anyway, but yeah, I think to round off nicely with the topics for today, and obviously thinking about that, the pitfalls of self-managed, the attention is in the detail, and it's really all about being very methodical, being very meticulous about dates and follow-ups and record keeping, and having everything done right in the first instance in terms of your referencing, your paperwork, and all that detail, because that's the thing that will come back to bite you at the end if you need to, if you need to serve an eviction notice for whatever reason and follow a process. If your paperwork's not been right at the beginning, you're going to have issues. So yeah, the attention is definitely in the detail.
Yeah, I mean, you could have like a tenant's name, like one spelling mistake in it. For example, you've got a tenant called Stephen, you've spelled it with a V instead of a PH. That's not the tenant's legal name, and you basically have an invalid lease there. So you have to be so meticulous when you're drawing up, because it's legal documents. So making sure
and the argument could be made, but it's still Stephen. But then I think they would still pull that apart. I mean, if they wanted to and needed to, they could. So don't leave yourself open like that. And it really just leaves us with the question, for anybody listening and watching and follow through with us today, is it time to really professionalize and look at your protection of your own portfolio or property? I mean, today's regulatory landscape leaves no room for compliance errors, as we've covered, and whether you own just that one rental property or you have 20. The self-managed rental risks now far outweigh the savings on potentially a monthly fee for a managing agent. And people might listen and think, oh, they're just pitching this because these are managing agents. No, we're pitching it because we understand how much work goes into it. And we really don't want to see people get caught out and hit with potentially thousands of pounds of fines, or potentially all the stress and all the pain that goes with that. We are all too aware and seen it firsthand for people that come to us that have been through it, and it's a shame to watch that. People sometimes put their retirement savings into property to try and build it up that little bit more and provide somebody with housing, and things have just went disastrously wrong because they've not known how to do it properly or not been educated on how to do it properly, and it's a shame. So it is very much trying to educate people and help people. By all means, if you want to self-manage, that's fine. Just make sure you do it right.
Yeah, and that's the key. Obviously, we're here to help people that maybe don't have the time to be keeping up with everything and making sure that they are on the ball with it. But there are landlords that are out there that do want to do it themselves, but make sure all your information is correct. Make sure you have all the information and you're actually implementing it as well.
Yeah, I think just for me, finally, I think self-managed landlords, if they are educated and providing really good housing and really follow through on that duty of care for tenants and things, it gives the entire private sector a better representation, and as a whole, not just agents and landlords and things separately, as a whole, it gives us a better standing as housing providers ultimately. It is all a business at the end of the day, but you're providing housing for people, and if you could do that to the best of your ability and have a really professionalized industry, whether you're self-managed or using an agent, that is ultimately what I would like to see for the most part. Yeah, in fact, for the entire part. So, but yeah, no, that's great, and thanks for joining in, Karen, and running through that with me today. Hopefully that's been helpful to people that possibly are self-managed or are looking to start up a portfolio and not sure whether they should self-manage or use an agent. Then, I mean, by all means, I've dropped my direct mobile and email address and things is attached to the blog in this post. By all means, feel free to join to jump out in the comments to speak to Karen or I, or reach out to me direct. You're very welcome to do that.
Here to help.
Yeah. Okay, we'll leave it there today. That was really good. Thanks, Karen. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Again, jump in the comments box. If you're watching this on a rerun, we will try and get back to you, or you could reach out direct, and we will see you next time for the Lettings show.
See you later.
Thanks, Karen. Bye.